I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars. Today I'll be conducting an in-depth test of the new Mercedes-AMG GLC 43. If you're a subscriber and you caught my recent C43 sedan review, you'll know that I was very critical of that vehicle for a number of reasons. Its engine and transmission weren't talking very well together, the ride quality was really bad, and that particular car had a bunch of build quality issues as well. Glad to report that clearly Mercedes is learning from their program of downsizing engines, because the execution of the GLC 43 is much better than the C43. This car is actually relatively decent to drive, as we'll find in today's video. Plus, it actually hasn't got any more expensive than the old GLC 43. Nor should it though, because that car had a V6. This one has yet another AMG 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder. That doesn't tell the whole story though, because there are many aspects of this car that are actually pretty well done. And don't worry, Mercedes doesn't have a gun to my head just out of shot. Biggest problem for this car though continues to be the existence of the good old BMW X3 M40i, which is a little bit cheaper, keeps a straight six engine, and is just excellent to drive. So can the new AMG GLC 43 best vehicles like that and convince you to take one home? In this video, I'll let you know the answer. But before we get started, hit subscribe. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Jump into the cabin of the GLC 43, and I actually think that there is quite a lot to like in here, at least stylistically. Now, philosophically, you might be considering this car if you just really like Mercs. You know, if you're a loyalist to the three-pointer star, you don't want a BMW X3 M40i, even if it has 6 cylinders and this is a 4-cylinder car. Maybe you just really want a GLC. And if you want a sporty GLC, I actually think this probably isn't a bad one to go for. The GLC 63 is coming, but it is very expensive, and it is also based around a 2-litre 4-cylinder with a plug-in hybrid system like the new C63. Now that all works pretty well, being a big heavy SUV, and with some rumours starting to circulate that AMG might even go back to bigger engines for its top spec cars in future. I just think the GLC 43 philosophically makes more sense than the 63 to me right now. But it also kind of makes sense in terms of the spec levels are pretty good for Australia. We get a lot of features as standard. This particular press car has been optioned with some stuff that you don't need, including the AMG Performance seats that you see in here and carbon fiber trim. I would just skip both of those. This is only a 43. We really don't need a microfiber steering wheel and acres of carbon fiber in this heavy SUV. As it comes as standard, you just get nice leather seats, more like a comfort seat. You can get them in black or red or tan, and you've got quite a nice open pore wood trim fitted to the dash as standard. The paint colors are standard. You don't need to spend any more than this car's regular price to get a good spec. Stuff like full powered seats, heated seats, Burmester audio, a panoramic sunroof, the best headlights, they're all included. So Mercedes has done pretty well kind of throwing everything at this car, as it should, because it is in the 140s drive away. Definitely not an inexpensive vehicle. Cabin-wise, the new GLC is very similar to the new C-Class. And again, if you're a subscriber, you'll know that I ran a base C200 as a long-termer recently. So there's a lot of familiarity here, including this vertical format touchscreen, which actually works pretty well with wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and your climate functions are always on the screen. You also have this sort of floating panel as a driver's display, quite customizable. The screens are really bright, so even though they don't have a cowl over them, the sun just can't outshine these screens, to be frank. Steering wheel definitely feels lush with the microfiber, but even the base, just perforated leather wheel, feels really good. Metal shifters for the paddle shifters, really nice. And then a lot going on the spokes. Really small, fiddly, hard to use, often making incorrect inputs. Mercedes should just change this design, but I do like the Manatino switches down here for the different drive modes, and you can set some shortcuts on this one for like loud exhaust, ESC Sport, the adaptive damper setting. So that stuff is cool and should stay, in my opinion. One thing that I wish Mercedes would do with its modern interiors is screw them together better. I'm not sure if they just need to spend a bit more on adhesive tape, or if they need to go back to the drawing board on clips and designing stuff to make the cars not creak and rattle, but something has to be done. One of the cars that I have in my garage is a 10-year-old, last of the line, W204 C-Class. Does anything creak or rattle? No. But in these modern Benzes, you just have these constant sounds of stuff shifting in the interior. This one is brand new with no Ks on it. It's got a very stiff suspension. This stuff rattles and creaks over bumps. Years down the track, I really worry the sort of rattle box this thing might become. Not sure what they need to do to fix it. Squeaking cabin center, I mean, just to perfectly illustrate the point. The cabins look good, but they just make far too many rattle and creaky sounds, and Mercedes needs to address this because it's a consequential element of being considered a luxury vehicle or not. Rant over. Storage, pretty good. Big center bin down here, cup holders, wireless charging that works well, decent storage space in the center, big door bins, and a good view out, at least in the SUV version. So, bit of a mixed bag, some advice for Benz. On that, let's move to the second row. Here in the back of the GLC, it's just a good-sized, mid-size, sporty crossover. Now, I do have a relatively forward driving position, but I'm 6 foot or 183 centimeters, and you can see I've got plenty of room, good leg room behind this quite nicely finished seat. Toe room's good and headroom's no issue beneath a standard panoramic sunroof. Keep in mind we do have the SUV version of the GLC 43 here. If we had the coupe version, rear headroom would definitely be more compromised. Frankly, I think the SUV looks better anyway, so this is the way I would go. Big transmission tunnel in the floor, however, so getting a fifth person into the vehicle is going to be a bit pokey, but certainly for 4 adults, no problem. Air vents down there, no separate climate zone, which feels a little bit cheap at this kind of money, but all nice materials still back here. No seat heating, I will point that out. Center armrest, nice grained leather, device holder, cup holders, what have you. It's pretty much all here. So as back seats go, relatively simple, but a spacious one. Moving around the back of this black GLC 43 now, you will note that the Australian spec car has the night package as standard. So no bright chrome around the windows, which frankly I'm actually okay with in the case of the GLC, because I think with the bright package, these look maybe a touch overdone. I would normally prefer aluminium look on premium vehicles like this, but the black pack is fine. You still are getting silver badges around the back here, and these quad round tailpipes, which do give the GLC 43 quite a mean looking stance. Me personally, I could definitely live without the standard fit side steps, which I tend to catch my trousers on and get them dirty when I get out of the car. But I like the fact that Mercedes Australia has gone for 20-inch wheels, which are not too big. In fact, it's got quite a chunky tyre, which overall does help the ride of this car. And it does need some help, as we'll find out. Now, we've got a power tailgate. This is the SUV shape of the GLC 43. There's a more expensive coupe version. I always prefer the wagon on these cars, much more practical in real terms. 620 litres of space in the boot, which is pretty good. It's very wide, the load height's relatively low. It's just really square, really functional. You've got some cool touches like a little strap for anything delicate. You've got some netting over here. You can drop the rear seats 40-20-40 and do it remotely from here in the boot. All in all, very few complaints. Plus controls here to drop that power tailgate, or you can close it and lock the vehicle. Now, onto running costs. Pretty important when you cut out a bunch of cylinders. Of course, the big running cost is going to be your petrol. Now, no surprise that this thing requires premium octanes. It's got a pretty highly strung 310 kilowatt 2-litre turbo engine. The old GLC 43 had a 3-litre V6 with a claimed fuel use of 10.4 litres per 100 Ks. So you're talking early to mid-teens in the real world. You'll do a little bit better than that in BMW's X3 M40i with its straight 6. The disappointment is the new GLC 43, which downsizes to a 2-litre 4-banger, used 15 litres per 100 Ks in my week with the car. Definitely biasing urban and commuting a little bit more, but also some open road stuff. It's not particularly fuel efficient, even though you're forced to go to a much smaller engine. To me, it doesn't really add up. Keen to know your thoughts though, let me know down below in the comments. The other big cost is going to be your cap price servicing, which is fairly dear from Mercedes-Benz Australia. Warranty, 5 years, unlimited kilometers for this vehicle. All right, so the AMG GLC 43, let's take it for a bit of a drive. Now, at the start of the video, I alluded to the fact that the GLC 43 has ended up being executed better than the C43, which is mechanically similar. It's kind of the sedan version of this car. There is a wagon overseas that we don't get. The W206 C-Class is actually a pretty good product, especially the C200 that I ran as a long-termer, but the C43 was disappointing, mostly because of the engine and gearbox combination. It was a very unhappy marriage, and I provided some robust feedback, and some other people also provided honest feedback about that. And it's really good to see that clearly that's been listened to by AMG, because by the time the GLC 43 has come out, the engine transmission combination has been largely fixed. Now, it's not perfect. I still don't think it's the happiest marriage in the world. I still don't think it's as smooth as the combination of BMW's B58 straight six and the ZF 8-speed auto in this car's chief rival, the X3 M40i, but it is absolutely livable and actually quite effective. Now, I sort of come into this test not being, I guess, ideologically opposed to the GLC 43 going down to be a 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder rather than a V6. I think when you're talking about like the big swinging Mercedes products, like the C63, to some extent the GLC 63, downsizing from a V8 to a 2-litre 4 is a little bit more offensive. But the GLC 43, my attitude is, I don't really care. The old V6 was not exactly the most sparkling 6-cylinder engine in the world, and if the 2-litre here lightens up the front axle and is quick and effective, then it might be a good thing. And to some degree that's true. Now, I think this car is probably a bit overpriced as a 4-cylinder. It didn't get more expensive than the old GLC 43, which is a good thing, but it didn't really get cheaper either, even though we've downsized the engine. But still, we've got really good power here, 310 kilowatts of power. We've got 500 Newton meters of torque, big numbers for a 4-pot to be producing. I assume this is probably not the most under-stressed engine in the world. And we also have a 48-volt integrated starter generator, as well as the mild hybrid system in this car. And as our performance figures show, it's pretty quick. It's decent from 0 to 100, and it's good on the brakes as well. And just driving around for your commuting, your suburban work, and on country roads, on the highway, overtaking other vehicles, the GLC 43 doesn't feel weak in the powertrain department. In fact, it actually feels like it's always got some power in reserve, which is what you want and perhaps a little bit unexpected for such a small engine. However, go to something like the slightly cheaper X3 M40i with its 6-cylinder, or something more expensive like a Jaguar F-Pace SVR, and those vehicles don't just feel generously powered, they feel really very powerful indeed. But in comparison to the GLC 43, if you spend a little bit less on BMW's 6-cylinder X3, that car in some ways actually feels a little bit more girthily powered to me, whereas spending more on an Alfa Romeo Stelvio Quadrifoglio or a Jaguar F-Pace SVR, the latter which has a V8, they feel very, very generously powered indeed. So while the GLC 43 isn't slow, its powertrain doesn't kind of become one of the greats in the segment, if that makes sense. One thing I do like is that we have a pretty loud exhaust. And some crackles and pops as well. So in some ways it does feel like AMG has managed to engineer in some character to the way this vehicle sounds, despite it still only being 2 litres. The transmission as well, it shifts pretty cleanly most of the time. Very occasionally you can catch its logic out and you can get a slightly firm or harsh shift, but nothing compared to the C43 that we tested together last year. They've definitely upped the refinement when it comes to the 2024 GLC 43 recipe. What about the rest of the driving package? Well, I would say that you should be prepared for the GLC 43 to be pretty firm, but not uncomfortable. Now, modern AMGs really have this character to them where Mercedes kind of insists on dialing up the spring rates and really not allowing a lot of suspension travel at all. And that's very much how it feels in the GLC 43. It's not quite reactive over bumps, it's just that the suspension does not have a massive amount of compliance. So if you drive across a speed bump or through a pothole, you'll just notice that the suspension rebounds immediately. It feels very, very tightly wound. It feels very firm, but again, the core damping actually is there, and so it's not an uncomfortable experience. It's just you absolutely know what's happening on the road surface. You're never going to feel like this car is super supple or soft or plush. If you want that, you could go for a GLC 300, the non-AMG version of this car. The 43, it reminds you that it's an AMG, and a lot of people will like that, and frankly, I don't mind it. I especially like the fact that they've just kept with 20-inch wheels on this car, which is basically a small wheel in terms of a modern SUV. So we have quite a bit of chunky tyre here to help insulate some of those bumps, but still, you know what's going on. Handling wise, the move to the 2.4 litre has actually been an improvement, because even though this vehicle isn't exactly lightweight, the amount of weight over the front axle has been reduced. So you notice that this vehicle actually turns in quite a zealous manner, particularly for an SUV. If you weren't sitting so high with such a good view out, you might even think you were in a C43 wagon, which is no bad thing. I actually quite like the way this vehicle handles. Its steering doesn't have much feel to it, but it's quick, it's delivered through this kind of cool steering wheel, and you know, the car feels like it's responding well to the inputs that the driver is giving it. All in all, it sort of has this fluid quickness to its character. It does feel sporty, and I found myself driving quite sportily while I was testing this vehicle too. So all in all, I don't mind the character. Safety wise, the systems can be deactivated quite easily, but even just leaving them on, they work pretty well. The lane centering is good, the adaptive cruise control is smooth, the blind spot monitoring is accurate, the 360-degree camera is quite crisp and clear, so I didn't have a problem with the safety features or the refinement of this vehicle. Its big problem is just that you can still get the main rival with a 6-cylinder for less money. So whether or not the GLC 43 is worth it is something I kind of need you guys to let me know your thoughts on. So what's my final verdict on the new Mercedes-AMG GLC 43? Well, it's a relatively positive one. This car isn't bad. It's certainly quick, I like the steering, and it definitely has that taut, sporty, firm character that I think buyers in this segment are looking for. I think it could ride in a little bit more of a compliant fashion, but it's not bad. I think the interior quality could be a lot better. That taut chassis combined with interior components that just aren't screwed together that well is a combination that leads to rattles in a box-fresh press car, let alone your own vehicle after 5 years and 100,000 Ks of driving. That to me is a little bit unsettling. The big problem is that while the GLC 43 is good, some of the other vehicles in the segment are great. The BMW X3 M40i might be quite dated now, but it's still such a benchmark, and it starts at 10 grand less than this car. Even optioned up to the hilt, you're only really at the price of a GLC 43 with a 3-litre straight-six engine. Or you can spend a little bit more and get something like a Stelvio Quadrifoglio or a Jaguar F-Pace SVR, though those cars are definitely likely to depreciate faster than this tried and tested Mercedes-AMG, which will definitely find you a second-hand buyer. Or will it? Some sources out of Europe are indicating that AMG could do an about-face and return to bigger engines once again. It's probably more of an issue for the GLC 63, which is a plug-in hybrid 2-litre now, which could return to a V8. But if AMG embraces big cylinder counts once again, it does make me a little bit concerned for the early adopters that were happy to splash out on a 2-litre 4-cylinder. For now, if I was considering this car, I'd probably just wait 6 months to see what happens in this space. That being said, if you test drive it and you like it, feel free to go ahead, because this is definitely not a bad car. It's actually a pretty good one. Those are my thoughts. Let me know down below in the comments what you think. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.